Hello everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. I appreciate a good ghost story, both in quality, but also character. Just imagine entering a home, only to discover that it's not devoid of life, but rather inhabited by a spirit, one who remains devotedly vigilant over its occupants. Those spirits who linger long after their loved ones have departed their dwellings. Tonight we explore stories where the ethereal entities inhabiting these spaces choose to protect and guide the living instead of driving them away. But because no exploration of the paranormal realm would be complete without acknowledging its darker aspects, we'll also hear of encounters with spirits whose sole purpose is to expel the living, leaving behind a haunting trail of fear and desolation. And how does one distinguish between a guiding hand and a malevolent force hell-bent on torment? We hear of people navigating the mystifying waters of that very question. They strive to unravel the enigmas quite literally surrounding them. So, let's get started, shall we? I went to high school in northern Kentucky for a couple of years. Me being bored with little friends, didn't really know what else to do other than take my bike out and go explore the mountainous roads near home. In the middle of summer, I left about 8 a.m. and set out for a nearby town. At about 11 a.m., I realized that I was getting pretty thirsty, and when I looked down at the cup holder, I panicked. I'd forgotten my water bottle on the kitchen counter. These are the foothills of the Appalachians. There's gotta be a stream somewhere, right? I dropped the bike near the side of the road and covered it with leaves, started walking towards what I hoped was a stream at the bottom of the hill. There were streams everywhere, so I hoped there would be some water. When I got to the bottom, sure enough, there was a stream. Or at least there was when it rained, because it was all dried up. I had a splitting headache. I could hardly think clearly. I didn't know what to do, so I prayed. To this day, I've only prayed for 4 things in my entire life, and this was the first one. I just prayed for water, or guidance to a house, or a store, or someone to possibly drive by, something to drink. Halfway back up the hill, a man in a suit walked out from a tree, like, no shit, right there in front of me, and said, "You look thirsty. Would you like some water?" And he held out a bottled water. I didn't notice that he was wearing a suit at the time. I didn't care that it was so random. I just took it and drank it. He gave me directions to a house about 10 minutes away, told me that they'd give me a lift home. I thanked him I don't know how many times and started walking up the hill, thinking that he was right behind me. Only he wasn't, and I didn't notice until I got to the top and sat down in the shade, cooling off. I sat there thinking for a few minutes about how random that was. And wait, was that guy wearing a suit? Yes, he was. What the fuck? After 10 minutes of me trying to figure it out rationally, I just gave up and continued on to the house that he'd given me directions to. Maybe they knew him. I found the house, and they gave me some Gatorade and a lift home with my bike in the back of their truck. Along the way, we made some small talk. I told them about the man in the suit. They looked at each other, and it got awkward. Well, they can think I'm crazy or not. I don't care as long as I can get home. The air conditioning felt great, and I just looked out the window the last bit before I got to my parents' house. The wife spoke up and asked me, what did the man look like? I told her what I'd noticed. His hair, the tattoo on his hand. She started to break down crying, told me to shut up. Not in a mean way, just impassionately to shut up. The man looked at me in the rear view. told me about how their son had died near their house in a freak accident. And my description, it sounded just like him. Then they sort of apologized, told me not to take offense, that it probably wasn't him. They were backtracking. Now they thought that I thought they were crazy. But I don't know that I did. Was it him? I'll never know. I don't even know where I was. Was it an answer to my prayer? Maybe. I just don't know. I have no rational explanation, only a memory. It was late at night, and my boyfriend and I were driving to my house. We took a shortcut through an area of town that everybody here calls the Bottoms, or River Bottoms. It's right in the middle of a huge metropolitan city in the U.S. There's no buildings, though, only fields and trees. You can't build there because it's a floodplain, not suitable for building on. There's one narrow road that goes through the middle of the Bottoms, and it just so happens to be a direct link between my boyfriend's house and mine. Late at night, it's very dark. There's no streetlights. So we were traveling rather quickly down that road when we came upon a bridge. You could only see what was visible in the headlights, road and very tall grass. It was probably 3 feet tall. We went up and over the bridge and began to descend on the other side. Suddenly, a woman appeared on the right side of the road. The headlights shined directly on her. She was standing in the grass right beside the road. It was 2:30 in the morning. The area was completely deserted. We were both stunned, silent. We sped past her. After a frightening moment, we both shouted, "Did you just see that girl?" Yes, we had both seen her. Immediately, I assumed she was the one whose car had either broken down or had been wrecked, because she had a distressed look about her. We spoke rapidly on top of each other. Should we turn back? Oh my God. Should we call 911? What should we do? Is she okay? Earlier that night, we had both had a couple of drinks. Many hours had passed and we were both sober. But in our part of the world, the police can arrest you and take you to jail if they even smell alcohol in your breath. You could get into a huge amount of trouble, even go to prison. If we had to turn back, if we had to call the police, it was just too risky. I mean, if she was really in distress, she could call for help on her cell phone, right? Oh my God, what if her phone was dead? Physical description. She was young, between 17 to 25 years old. She had blonde hair. She was pretty, wearing a white shirt. The bottom half of her body was covered in thick, tall grass. She was sort of waving her arms, not over her head, but in front of her. Her face wore a scared expression, but she had no blood, no bruises or dirt on herself. So what in the hell was she doing standing right by the road in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, by herself, looking scared and waving her arms? Instead, we called in an anonymous tip. We were both really tired, and we proceeded home and went to bed. The next morning, I felt really guilty because we didn't stop. The local police post every police activity on the website that's called into a scanner. I began to search the scanner, looking for an accident report. There was nothing. We both felt very bad and worried about the young woman. Later, my boyfriend called the police to follow up on this anonymous tip we had made the night before. They told us that they had checked it out, but there was no car, no girl, no wreck where we had specified. This only made us feel half better, because we knew what we had seen. Later, my boyfriend told our story to his friend. His friend grew up near the Bottoms. She was the one who put this all together for us. We'd seen a ghost, she told him. She recalled that 20 or so years ago, a young woman named Katie Nesbitt had been murdered in the River Bottoms. It was a huge deal, so we went online and we found some old newspaper articles about the murder. There was a yearbook picture of the girl. The girl had blonde hair. Could that have really been her ghost? The most awful thing about it is that Katie and her boyfriend had been brutally stabbed to death over a car stereo. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I continued to search online and ended up finding a page for a local paranormal society. I clicked on Contact Us. I typed up our story and I felt better. At least I had reported this to somebody. I received a reply email from the man at the Paranormal Society. He told me that the Bottoms was definitely a haunted area. Many people had reported seeing strange things there over the years, and he also could recall that poor girl's murder. So, it was settled. Mystery solved. I'm not a ghost type. I've never encountered a ghost or an alien or a witch or UFO or anything like that. I do believe, though, that ghosts exist. But I would never go looking for one. All of that stuff honestly scares me to death. But I'm here to tell you that this really did happen. I wouldn't make it up. There were also 2 witnesses that saw the exact same thing. And anyone around here would tell you this. You never see anyone on the side of the road in the Bottoms, especially at night, especially not a girl all alone. The paranormal investigator promised to investigate our sighting, but I haven't heard from him in a while. I'll update you if I do. When I was about 14, I lived in an old house that once belonged to my great-grandmother. Right next door was an even older house that was once home to my great-grandmother's mother, Mama Roberts. Mama Roberts was dead, and I always suspected that she may have died in the house, because there was a creepy feel whenever you were in that house. We mostly used the house for storage, but there was also a ping pong table, and my friends would come over and we'd play ping pong in the house. One day, my friends and I were playing ping pong and it started to get late. So we turned off the lights in the house, my friends went home, and I went back to my house. After an hour or so, my parents called me and told me that the light was on in the house, right where we were playing ping pong. I was sure that I'd turned off the light, but I stepped outside. I saw that dark, scary house with the light on in the room where we had been. The thought of going into that house in the dark gave me goosebumps all over. I was very scared, but almost for no reason. And then I had a thought. Mama Roberts is my relative. She wouldn't hurt me. Her spirit may even be able to help me if she had the chance. So I shouted out to the house and said, "Mama Roberts, I left the light on. Can you turn the light off?" That instant, the light went off. It still creeps me out, and that was 22 years ago. Let's roll back to 2013. It's winter in Florida, and to surprise my college roommate before we decide to go our separate ways, I get us tickets to see a concert in Miami, one that we've been anxious to see for a while. The drive was pretty awful, hundreds of miles from our home base in Orlando, but we were both so very excited to see the show. We'd made countless trips from Orlando to Palm Beach, so we weren't worried about anything, just a fun few days away from home. The concert was great, if anyone was wondering. Highly recommend Distant Worlds if you're on the fence. Regardless, we decided to stay with my aunt and uncle in Pembroke Pines for a night before making the drive home in the morning. So we drag our exhausted selves into the house and go lay down. I felt fine for the most part. Then I started coughing. Apparently I annoyed my aunt since she dropped a cough drop onto the corner of the bed that I was using. That night I had to prop myself up in order to get any sleep. Not a huge deal, just a bit of a cough. I figured maybe I caught a cold from the concert goers, but man, that was fast. Moving on, we make the drive home. My chest didn't bother me for the drive back, but the second that I went to lay down, and damn, the cough was back. Figures. I had the weekend off from work, so I wasn't terribly worried. I was more annoyed than anything else. So the plan was to wait until Monday and reassess. Monday rolls around, though, and it's much worse. I couldn't get any sleep. Every time I leaned back, I started dry hacking again. I called out of work since at the time I was a call center jockey and was thoroughly hoarse. I decided that it was time to see a doctor. The evaluation comes and goes. It's determined that I just have a cold. Blessed be. Time for some classic antibiotics and to get an old shot of steroids to get me back on my feet. Only, it doesn't go away. It doesn't get better. In fact, it gets much worse. Over the course of that week, it went from lying down coughing to even sitting down. I wasn't running any fever, I was just miserable. I was getting no sleep and so frustrated over all of it. On top of it, it felt like I was dry. I just needed to lay in a bathtub at all times. I can't explain that part, though. But another half a week passes. I'm sitting up on the couch and dropping in and out of consciousness. I think to myself, I can't breathe. I can't talk without coughing. I can't stand without fainting. I'm weak. I need help. I'd fallen the day before and hit my head against the table. I'd only been able to stand for 20 seconds before nearly blacking out. My roommate convinces me to go to the hospital. At the ER, I check myself in and nearly black out when typing in my social security number. I'm wheezing and coughing. At the triage, they're telling me to slow my breathing. I hadn't even noticed that my cough had changed to short, light gasps for air for about a week. I try, but I start coughing. It hurts so bad to cough at this point, and I begin to feel lightheaded. They move me to a gurney, and I see 5 doctors swarming me as my vision swims. Of course, I'm laying down, so I can't stop coughing. I start begging them to let me sit up, but they keep pushing me down. It's miserable. They have to do their checks, though, so I do my best to not death rattle too much at them. I feel strangely light and heavy at the same time. Everything looked very blurry, and this is just the beginning of my stay. Long story short, my lungs were both 96% full of fluid. I was put into quarantine. I stayed in the hospital for about a month. I was on life support for a while. They put me in the ICU. My heart had so much fluid around it that the doctor was surprised it still worked. I had a severe arrhythmia. To this day, I have liver issues. I suspect the infection hit it somehow and caused some problems. I believe I was diagnosed with double pneumonia until they figured out what the hell was in my body. A chaplain came by, asked me to tell him my last thoughts and wishes. I had no idea what a chaplain was, so we ended up just talking about video games for 3 hours. He was very nice to me, and I enjoyed his long daily visits. I hadn't realized how close to death I actually was, though, so it took some of the burden off the situation for me. I spent Christmas and my birthday on death's door, but the hospital ladies gave me some towels, rubber bands, and rubber gloves, all to make a Christmas tree for my table. One fun fact, I did get the nurse to do a wheelie in my wheelchair once. Anyway, it was confirmed to be anthrax spores in my lungs from a bronchoscopy. And that's the condensed story of how I almost died of anthrax, because I'm extremely stubborn. And honestly, it didn't feel that bad since it was so gradual. So, I'll end this by asking, did you know that anthrax is able to be contracted naturally? Because I sure didn't. So yeah, that's the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. I'm sure plenty of people go their whole lives without having a gun pointed at them. Me, I've come face to face with one more than I'd like. The first time I was walking into a store when I was 16, I startled one of the men robbing the place. He almost shot me in the face. .45 automatic. Never saw anything so huge in my life. I remember closing my eyes because he was that close. and it seemed inevitable. But then he suddenly brushed past me and out the door. Crazy. Just a couple years later, 18 years old, walking my girlfriend home on New Year's Eve in the middle of a snowstorm, a guy ran out of an alleyway, pointed a gun right at my gut, robbed me. That one was a chrome .38 revolver. I wasn't even thinking of myself at that time, just really didn't want anything to happen to my girlfriend. Luckily, the man took off the moment he had my wallet. Not before whacking me real good with his revolver before taking off. Girlfriend was unscathed, so I considered it a win. I think the third time was probably the scariest. I was 28 years old managing a liquor store, and by that time, I had a son. The guy walks in. He immediately looks suspicious, but before I can even register why, he's pointing a gun at me. This time, it's a Beretta 9mm. He makes me empty the register, and then he marches me into the back room, where he makes me open the safe. Once I do, he tells me to lie on my stomach with my arms spread out. I thought for sure I was about to die. I told the guy to literally take whatever he wanted, that nothing in the store meant nearly as much as my son at home. The guy's sort of size is the best way to explain it. And before he continues to rob the place, he tells me, "Man, I'm not gonna kill you unless you try something. Don't try nothing and you're good." When someone's pointing a gun at your back while you're laying face down on the ground, you just kind of have to take their word for it. So, I took his advice and tried nothing. Though my life tried to flash before my eyes multiple times, a few moments later, he was gone. Yes, I own a gun. I live in a conceal and carry state. However, in this situation, it wouldn't have done me any good. The man got a jump on me, and I had to be smart about my next move. I've learned that people carry and use guns for a couple of reasons: to be intimidating to others and to protect themselves. This guy wasn't in a position to need to protect himself. He wanted to intimidate me. Had I found a way to get my gun, I think things would have honestly ended differently. Three years ago, I got lost in the woods, and I've never told anyone what really happened. I didn't want people to think I was crazy, but I just can't keep it to myself. I live on the outskirts of a very large forest in Louisiana. Every weekend I would hike the same trail, but occasionally I'd also do a little exploring. There's offshoots and game trails everywhere, but my GPS always brought me home safe and sound, until I got stuck in a spot without service. My compass app was likewise useless. I had no clue which direction I came from, and I didn't even think to use it until after an hour of running in circles. I began eliminating pathways by breaking branches along the way. I thought if I could stop going in circles, I would eventually find my way back, but then it started getting dark. The prospect of spending the night in the woods was suddenly very real, and to make matters worse, it started raining. It's one thing to tough it out in a dark forest, but being soaked adds a whole new layer of misery, one I wasn't keen to endure. I kept my eyes glued to my phone. Even if I didn't find familiar territory, I expected to find a bar of service. But nope. The rain came down harder, and I could barely see when I stumbled upon an abandoned house. Well, it was more of a shack than anything. Most of it was in ruins under a collapsed roof, but the kitchen and den were just moldy with a slight breeze. It was at least better than getting soaked outside, so I cleared off a chair and settled in for the night. There was no way I was going to sleep, but I had my portable battery, so at least my phone kept a charge. For the next hour or two, I listened to whatever podcasts I had downloaded, and then the door blew open with a loud bang. The noise caused me to jump out of my seat with a startled scream, so I pushed a metal table in front of the door to keep it shut. Not long after returning to my seat, I began hearing noises inside the house too, but the storm was raging by then, so I did my best to ignore it. The place was in shambles. Of course there would be some strange sounds. It wasn't until I heard the footsteps that I started to really worry. And they were footsteps. There was no mistaking it. They were coming from one of the destroyed bedrooms, but I didn't understand how. When I looked in there, all I saw were piles of wood and debris from half the roof falling in. I stood watching as the steps grew closer, waiting to see who would appear in the doorway. They crossed the threshold a few seconds later, but there was nobody attached. It was like an invisible person was walking straight towards me. I ran towards the door, but before I could move the table, the footsteps vanished mid-stride. I stood there, frozen, waiting and listening for several minutes before returning to my seat. Desperate to stay dry, I convinced myself I'd imagined it, but that only worked for so long. Things were quiet for maybe another hour, but as soon as I let my guard down, there was a series of loud bangs in the kitchen. When I went to check, all of the remaining cabinet doors were now wide open. I'm positive they were closed when I arrived, and I hadn't gone back in there since. Again, things were quiet for a time, but my final straw happened when a cold hand clasped the back of my neck. I screamed like someone was trying to kill me, and it sent my phone flying across the room. After retrieving it, the metal table flipped over on its side, and the door was blown open yet again. Though, looking back, I'm not sure if the wind was actually to blame. That was all I could handle, though. The rain suddenly didn't seem so bad after all. I ran into the darkness with nothing but my phone's flashlight and the lightning guiding my way. I didn't know which direction I was going, but I knew it was away from whatever was in that house. I can't be sure how long I was actually running, but eventually I stopped dead in my tracks as my phone began ringing off the hook. My husband, parents, sister, everyone I ever knew had called or texted me at least 100 times since I'd gone missing. There were new alerts for a local missing woman. Turns out she was me, and all I could do was cry relief. With my GPS working again, I learned I was much farther from home than I could have guessed. It shouldn't have even been possible to walk that far. I eventually met a group of search and rescuers who took me to get checked by paramedics. I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone about the house, so I left everything out, except for how I got lost in the first place. These days, on a rare occasion, I do go for a hike. I don't leave the main trail anymore, though. Always be extra cautious when you're out on your own. Things can happen so fast. In April of 2014, I purchased my first home and did what new home buyers tend to do. I'm sure when you hear a story of growling at the foot of someone's bed, you might assume it's the dog, but there was no way that this guttural growling was coming from my 3-month-old mutt. First of all, the pup was in another room in a crate. Second, he was so darn tiny still. And there's just no doubt that this growling was mere feet away from me where I lay awake, and it wasn't small. Of course, I could have just awoken from a dream and had not yet recognized that I was sleeping. However, I laid in my bed completely still for several minutes before braving the light, and that growling never halted. When the lights went on, the growling immediately stopped. Spooked, I decided tonight was a good night as any to reconsider my policy of where the puppy sleeps at night. After I moved my pup to his new sleeping spot and comforted myself, the lights went back off. A few minutes later, I heard dog sounds coming from the foot of the bed, but not so much growling, more like a grunt of appeasement. I didn't hear that particular growling from a few nights ago, so the new rule in this house was dog sleeps in the bed. My house had had 2 previous owners, and I know that at least the most recent of them had large dogs. The house was in foreclosure, so I don't have a lot of details about the owners, beyond what the neighbors have mentioned in casual conversation. That house continued to be a bit odd. The growling, sure, it stopped, but things ending up in different places. The sound of doors shutting, but nothing was actually closed. Just odd. While I've had many experiences in my life, the home I live in now, it hasn't seen so much activity. But the town, Ogden, it's well known for paranormal activity. A final thought. That puppy had always refused to go into the basement of that house. He insisted at always being by my side, but would never journey to the basement with me. I've never heard that sound again or felt that negative, impeding feeling from a spirit. I like to think it's probably because I always have my dogs with me. In a weird way, I think that they really are protectors, even from the things we can't see. When my son was born, I lived in a house that was 110 years old. It was a beautiful home that had been restored to its original beauty. It had solid walls, high ceilings, huge comfortable rooms, and a swinging door between the dining room and living room. There were a few times that I'd catch something in my peripheral vision, a flash, a slight movement, etc. I didn't really dwell on it as I had other things that required my attention, being the single mother of a young child. One evening, after a very long day at work, my son was about 6 months old at the time. I had him upstairs with me in my bedroom watching a movie. The swinging door in the kitchen swooshed. We usually kept it propped open. I didn't think much about it, thinking it was my roommate closing it for some reason. Then it happened again, and again, and again. It kept happening. I went to the top of the stairs and called my roommate's name a couple of times. No answer. The door kept swooshing. I called my roommate on her cell phone. She was over a block away at a friend's house, and they came over immediately. They had 911 already dialed on the phone, ready to dial the next one because we thought someone was in that big house, someone that shouldn't be. There was no one there, but oddly enough, there was a gas leak. The whole downstairs reeked of gas. I don't know what or who swooshed that door, but I do know that if my son and I had gone to sleep without knowing there was a gas leak, it's quite possible I wouldn't be writing this today. I guess this is why I say or think that not all spirits are scary or bad. Sometimes I think they act as mysterious guardian angels. At least, in my case, they did. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me, whether it's your first time or you're a regular. Your support means the world. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night. Keep those eyes open for those deep sleep videos. And of course, double features. Subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons, whom we appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, The Dark Cosmos, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Lissane, Arlene F, and Adrienne. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining our Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour, or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour, YT. Stay spooky.